What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another tournament breakdown presented by Midway USA. They have supported us and brought these videos to you guys. So these do not replace the regular BMP Fishing the Series videos. Those are still happening. These are just a more in-depth look at the baits and the tackle that I used and how I broke Lake Fork down and what we were dealing with, the conditions we were dealing with, and how that changed throughout the event. And we definitely had a lot of change here at Lake Fork this week. We just wrapped up in 23rd place, which is crazy to think because I had 77 pounds, a little over 77 pounds for 3 days. So 15 bass, over 77 pounds, over a 5-pound average. Is absolutely insane fishing. All top 10 guys broke the Century belt or joined the Century Club, which is over 100 pounds for 4 days. I believe there were 28 anglers on pace to do that after day 3. So it's crazy to think of what those weights were. And I really had a pretty simple approach. I wasn't sure coming into it what these fish were going to be doing. I figured they would be a little bit further along than what they were, but we were dealing with really warm weather. And as practice went on, even from the first day to the second day, those were both high 70, low 80 degree days. And both of those were pushing fish up. There was a really good shallow swim jig bite. There were some fish starting to spawn. We were seeing big ones on beds. And I really was thinking that it was going to shape up to be a shallow water beatdown. But then Mother Nature threw us a curveball, and we got really cold temperatures, lows in the 30s. The last day of practice was 30-mile-an-hour winds out of the north, super major cold front, 30-degree drops. It knocked the water temperature back 10 degrees in some places, and all of those fish that were thinking about spawning and not quite there, they pushed back. Some of those fish completely vanished from their areas. I don't know how far they went, but they went to further than we could find them. And other places, they kind of stayed around and milled around and just moved out. And so I had to change some of my tactics. And I really had 4 key baits that played for me this week. The first one being the Megabass Vision 110 +2. And I was using this when I was fishing those fish that were a little bit deeper, when they were at that 10 to 12 foot zone. And what I've realized is that it's really important to be able to get that bait down to those fish quick when you're seeing them on your graph. And being able to make a long cast is important. This bait casts great, but really being able to get it down to that depth zone. Even if I get it down before it gets to the fish, I'm able to reel up and get it to the fish and in their strike zone as quickly as possible. So that was super key important thing. Normally I like to throw my jerkbaits on 10-pound tests. This week I was throwing them on 12-pound Seagar Tatsu, dealing with big fish, a lot of timber. I wanted just a little bit extra abrasion resistance, a little bit extra strength, and I wasn't fishing crazy deep, so I didn't need my baits to get crazy deep. And pairing that up with the Daiwa Tatula SV70 TW. I like the smaller size reels. You've probably heard me talk about that before if you've watched any of these videos. I like that palmable size. It just fits in my hand really well. So any techniques like jerkbaits where I'm creating a lot of action with the rod, I get less fatigue with those smaller frame reels, and they still cast phenomenal, especially if you're downsizing to smaller baits. And then throwing that on the Alpha Angler Slasher. It's my favorite jerkbait rod. 610, medium action rod, nice light tip, but plenty of backbone to catch those 5, 6, 7, 8 pounders. So super, super fun way to catch them. And then when those fish got a little bit shallower, I was still throwing a jerkbait. It seemed like to be the best way to get those fish to react. They'd get behind the bait and they'd start coming at the bait, and then you just twitch, and you'd almost speed it up like it was trying to get away from them. But the ability of a jerkbait to stop and pause in their face was super important. So when those fish got a little bit shallower, I went with the Edo Shiner, and that's one of my favorites. I feel like this bait kind of flies under the radar below the 110, but I really love the Edo Shiner pretty much all the time. It just has a different action. It's got a really hard kind of darting side to side action and a shimmy to it. It's got a little bit more of a roll and a shimmy. So just a slightly different action. Bait casts great. It's a little bit heavier than a 110. So when those fish get out there 100, 110 feet, I can make a super long cast. And for that one, I was throwing the Daiwa Steez CT SV TW. And it's same frame size. It's just a higher end reel, and throwing that in an 8-to-1. I didn't mention that on the 70, on the TW70, but both of those I throw in an 8-to-1 because you're dealing with a smaller spool, a smaller frame size. That 8-to-1 gives you the amount of line per handle turn that you need. So that's important. I like throwing it on an 8-to-1. If that fish comes up behind it, hits it, knocks slack in your line, you're able to reel down and lean into them really well. And then also throwing that same line, 12-pound Seagar Tatsu. And that was the deal. Both of them in matte shad. Felt like that color worked really well. This bait, this exact physical bait, I caught in 11:34 in practice. So when I did that and that fish had it ate pretty well, I thought, you know what, I'll just go ahead and I'll stick with matte shad. Seems like a good color to stick with. But what happened when we got that cold front, a lot of those fish, what I noticed the first morning that I got to my areas was that they were positioning down really low to the bottom. You'd even see some of these little dots, right? At the bottom is right here. You just see this little dot creeping along the bottom, almost looked like a little fur ball sliding across the bottom, and it really pushed those fish down. I don't know if they were trying to get heat from the bottom and those contours or what they were doing, but I ended up not even throwing this in practice, but I always keep it in the boat, and that is a drop shot with the X-Zone Deception Worm, green pumpkin blue. This setup never leaves my boat, no matter where we go, just because it has bailed me out so many times. I have so much confidence in it that I always keep it in the boat. And it played this week. Several of the fish that I weighed came on this bait, several 4-pounders, 5-pounders, 6-pounders. They came on this. And so, like I said, I didn't throw it in practice. I didn't need to. They were biting really well, but that cold front came. They pushed to the bottom. I needed something I could get down there on the bottom and just shake it in their face until they bit. And that's what I chose. Worked great. Little 1/4 ounce weight. 1/4 ounce is my go-to size. That is an X-Zone teardrop tungsten weight in green pumpkin. Seems to work really, really well. And then for my leader, normally I'm 8-pound, but this week I stepped it up to a 10-pound Seagar Tatsu. That just seems to help a little bit, get those fish out of that cover. You know, because those fishing around trees and things like that, and big fish, you need to be able to get them out of the cover. And then I had that spooled up actually on a 2500 size Daiwa Exist. Incredibly light, balanced setup right here. You can see just one finger perfectly balances horizontally. And then actually have that attached to a new braid. If you realize how the color is different, it's not the flash green smackdown. There's actually a JDM Seagar braid called PEX8 that will be available very soon. It is a JDM product that is going to be available in the United States. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Now the other bite, which might arguably be the most fun bite that I had all week and where I really wanted to spend most of my time, but the cold front just knocked it back. I still caught a few fish doing it day 1. Day 2, I didn't even try to do it. And day 3, the last day that I got a fish, it ended up bailing me out at the end of the day. So that is an X-Zone Mega Swammer. See, it's still got a little bit of grass on it. when I say we just finished up, I mean like we literally just finished the tournament and I'm giving you guys the goods. But this is an X-Zone Mega Swammer. I cut it down a little bit. I like that big profile in the spring, and it keeps the bait up. And what I learned is that you get the best action out of it on a 1/2 ounce. So this is a 1/2 ounce Megabass Wose swimmer. Normally it has a blade coming off the bottom. I just clip that little blade off, and then you just have yourself a fine swim jig. And what I've realized with this swim jig is that looking at it, I thought there's no way that thing's gonna be very weedless because it has a pretty small weed guard. Thick fibers, but it doesn't have a lot of fibers. You know, there's only 5, 6, 7 fibers on there. But the head design actually keeps this bait very, very weedless. So it has a slightly flared design, and that creates a lot of action in the bait. But when it comes over a limb, it hits and it actually kicks the hook point away, and it comes through the cover. And that was a big key, being able to wind this bait through the cover, pop it over a limb, stop it, and then wham, those fish would hit. And I caught some really, really big ones, 6s, 7s, 8s in practice. And then in the tournament, I ended up weighing 6-pounders in it, 4-pounders on it. And it really bailed me out. I had 3 fish on the final day, or the 3rd day of the tournament, my final day. And it was 2 o'clock. I had an hour to fish, and I ended up running to an area where I got some bites on this and ended up catching a 3.5 and a 6.5. Totally saved my tournament, saved a lot of points. And this week I was throwing it on the Alpha Angler Zilla, which is 7.3, medium heavy. It's what I like to throw my swim jigs on, especially when I'm throwing it on braid. So I've got a 50-pound Seaguar Tactex braid. That's kind of their entry level braid, but I absolutely love it for swim jigs and frogs and flipping and stuff like that. It does a phenomenal job of cutting through that grass and casts really, really well. It doesn't dig into the spool on its own, and I just absolutely love that. And then my go-to reel, Daiwa Steez A TW in a 7.1 to 1. I like that gear ratio. Frogging, swim jigging when I need power, but I also need speed. That's kind of that middle ground that gives you the best of both worlds. So really keying in on those spawning areas, and you know, where I knew those fish were going to want to spawn, and then just backing off, looking at the Lake Master charts and looking at those contours where those fish were going to set up, and that's kind of where they pulled back, and a lot of those fish came to me, and I was able to capitalize on that. So hopefully that gives you guys some good information. If you guys want to check a lot of these baits out, you can get them on midwayusa.com. And I appreciate you guys watching.